Mincio stood at the entrance of Riverside High School and felt her stomach twist into knots. The building looked nothing like her old school. This one had tall glass windows, fresh paint on every wall, and students wearing brand new backpacks that probably cost more than her mother earned in a week. She looked down at her own uniform. It was clean but faded. Her mother had bought it from a second-hand store 3 days ago. The hem had been let down twice, and you could still see the old stitch marks if you looked closely. She took a deep breath and walked through the front doors. The hallway smelled like floor polish and expensive perfume. Groups of students stood together laughing and talking about their weekend plans. Nobody looked at her. She was invisible, and that was fine. Being invisible was better than being noticed for the wrong reasons. The office secretary gave her a schedule and a locker number. Mincio found her locker on the second floor. It was stuck and she had to pull hard 3 times before it opened with a loud bang. 2 girls nearby stopped talking and stared at her. One of them whispered something and they both laughed. Mincio felt heat rise to her cheeks. She put her worn textbooks inside quickly and checked her schedule. First period was English literature with Mrs. Davidson in room 204. Room 204 was at the end of the hall. Mincio walked in and saw 20 students already seated. They all looked comfortable, like they had known each other for years. The teacher stood at the front of the room writing something on the whiteboard. She was a tall woman with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. She wore a dark blue suit that looked expensive and reading glasses that hung from a chain around her neck. Mincio found an empty desk near the back and sat down. She took out her notebook and a pencil. The pencil was short, worn down from months of use. She had 3 more just like it in her bag, all saved from being thrown away. The bell rang and Mrs. Davidson turned around. Her eyes moved across the room, stopping briefly on each student. When her gaze reached Mincio, it lingered. Something changed in her expression. It was subtle, just a small tightening around her mouth, but Mincio saw it. She had seen that look before. "Good morning, class," Mrs. Davidson said. Her voice was crisp and formal. "I see we have a new student joining us today." She looked directly at Mincio. "Why don't you stand up and introduce yourself?" Mincio's heart started beating faster. She stood up slowly, feeling every eye in the room turned toward her. "I'm Mincio," she said quietly. "Speak up," Mrs. Davidson said. "We can't hear you." "I'm Mincio," she repeated, louder this time. "Min-Seo," Mrs. Davidson said, pronouncing it wrong. Several students giggled. "Mincio," she corrected gently. "It rhymes with so." Mrs. Davidson waved her hand dismissively. "Yes, well, where did you transfer from?" "Westside Middle School." Mrs. Davidson's eyebrows went up slightly. "I see. That's quite a different environment from what we have here at Riverside. This is an advanced literature class. We're currently studying Shakespeare. Have you read much Shakespeare at your previous school?" Mincio hesitated. She had read Romeo and Juliet last year, but something about the way Mrs. Davidson asked the question made her feel like any answer would be wrong. "Some," she said. "Some," Mrs. Davidson repeated. She smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. "Well, we'll see how you manage. You may sit down." Mincio sat down quickly. Her face felt hot and her hands were shaking slightly. She kept her eyes on her desk. Mrs. Davidson continued with the lesson. She talked about Macbeth and the theme of ambition. She asked questions and students raised their hands to answer. Every time someone gave a good answer, Mrs. Davidson praised them warmly. She smiled and nodded and said things like excellent analysis and very perceptive. Mincio listened carefully and took notes. She understood what Mrs. Davidson was teaching. She had always been good at English, even though it wasn't her first language. Her mother spoke Korean at home, but Mincio had worked hard to master English. She read books from the library every week. She knew she could do well in this class if given a chance. Halfway through the period, Mrs. Davidson assigned a major essay. "You'll write a 5-page analysis of Macbeth's character development," she explained. "This essay is worth 25% of your grade. I expect college-level work. This is due in 3 weeks." A boy in the front row raised his hand. "Mrs. Davidson, can we use online sources?" "Yes, but they must be academic sources. No Wikipedia, no Spark Notes. I want to see original thinking and deep analysis." She paused and glanced back at Mincio. "Some of you may find this assignment quite challenging. If you feel you're in over your head, there's still time to transfer to a regular English class." She didn't say Minseo's name, but everyone knew who she meant. A few students turned to look at her. Minseo kept her face blank and wrote down the assignment details in her notebook. Her pencil pressed hard against the paper. When the bell rang, students gathered their expensive bags and left the room in groups. Minseo took her time packing her worn textbooks. She was the last to leave. As she walked past Mrs. Davidson's desk, the teacher looked up. "Miss Min," Mrs. Davidson said, still refusing to pronounce her full name correctly. "If you need help with the assignment, there are tutoring services available. Though I'm not sure how much they can do in your situation." "I'll be fine," Minseo said quietly. "Thank you." She left the room and walked quickly down the hall. Her eyes stung, but she refused to cry. She had dealt with people like Mrs. Davidson before. Teachers who looked at her second-hand clothes and her foreign name and decided she wasn't smart enough. Teachers who smiled at other students but frowned at her. Teachers who expected her to fail. At lunch, Minseo sat alone at a table in the corner of the cafeteria. She ate the simple meal her mother had packed that morning: rice, kimchi, and a small piece of grilled mackerel wrapped in foil. The food smelled strong, and she saw some students at the next table wrinkle their noses. One girl whispered to her friend, and they both looked at Minseo and laughed. She ate quickly and threw away her trash. There was still 20 minutes left before the next class, so she went to the library. The library was quiet and mostly empty. Minseo walked along the shelves until she found the Shakespeare section. There were dozens of books, complete works, individual plays, critical analyses, and study guides. She pulled out a copy of Macbeth and sat down at a table. She opened it and started reading. The language was old and sometimes difficult, but she read slowly and carefully. When she didn't understand a word, she wrote it down to look up later. The librarian, an older woman with kind eyes, noticed her. "Finding everything you need?" she asked. "Yes, thank you," Minseo said. "Are you new here? I don't think I've seen you before." "It's my first day." "Well, welcome to Riverside. I'm Mrs. Chen. If you ever need help finding anything, just ask." "Thank you," Minseo said again. Mrs. Chen smiled at her, a real smile, and went back to her desk. Minseo kept reading. She read through lunch and continued until the bell rang for fifth period. She checked out the book and 3 others: critical essays about Macbeth, a biography of Shakespeare, and a guide to understanding Elizabethan English. That afternoon, Minseo rode the bus home to her neighborhood. The buildings here were old and cramped. Paint peeled from the walls and trash collected in the corners. She climbed 3 flights of stairs to her family's small apartment. Her younger brother Jun was already home watching cartoons on their old television. "How was school?" he asked without looking away from the screen. "It was okay," Minseo said. Her mother came home 2 hours later, exhausted from her shift at the cleaning company. She worked from 6 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon, scrubbing floors and washing windows in office buildings downtown. In the evenings, she worked at a restaurant washing dishes until midnight. "How was your first day?" her mother asked in Korean while heating up rice for dinner. "Good," Minseo said. She didn't mention Mrs. Davidson. Her mother already worked too hard. She didn't need more worries. After dinner, Minseo sat at the small desk in the corner of the room she shared with Jun. She opened the Macbeth book and started reading again. She read until her eyes hurt and the words blurred together. Then she read some more. Mrs. Davidson thought she didn't belong in advanced English. Mrs. Davidson thought she couldn't handle Shakespeare. Mrs. Davidson had already decided Minseo would fail, but Minseo had decided something too. She would write the best essay in the class. She would prove that being poor didn't mean being stupid. She would show Mrs. Davidson exactly who she was. Her hands clenched around her pencil and she began taking notes. 3 weeks passed, and each day in Mrs. Davidson's class felt longer than the last. Minseo quickly learned the pattern of how things worked in room 204. Mrs. Davidson called on the same 5 or 6 students every class. They sat in the front rows, wore expensive clothes, and always had the right answers ready. When they spoke, Mrs. Davidson smiled and nodded and praised their insights. Minseo raised her hand too. She raised it almost every day. She had answers, good answers, but Mrs. Davidson's eyes would slide right past her. Sometimes the teacher would look directly at Minseo's raised hand, pause for a moment, then call on someone else. It was like Minseo was invisible, except she knew she wasn't. Mrs. Davidson saw her. She just chose not to see her. The participation grade counted for 15% of the final mark. Minseo knew hers would be low, even though she tried harder than anyone else in class. She stayed up late every night reading the assigned chapters, taking careful notes and preparing thoughtful comments. But if you never got called on, how could you participate? Other teachers treated her normally. Her math teacher, Mr. Lopez, called on her regularly and praised her problem-solving skills. Her history teacher, Ms. Park, seemed impressed by her essays and once asked her to share her work with the class. But Mrs. Davidson's class was different. Every day brought small moments that stung like paper cuts. Min, Mrs. Davidson would say when taking attendance, still refusing to pronounce her full name after 3 weeks. She never bothered to learn it correctly, even though Minseo had corrected her multiple times. During class discussions, Mrs. Davidson would make comments that seemed innocent, but felt pointed. Some students come from backgrounds where literature isn't valued, she said once. They may struggle with the deeper meanings in texts like these. It's a cultural barrier that's difficult to overcome. Minseo sat very still when Mrs. Davidson said things like that. She kept her face blank and her eyes on her notebook. But inside, something burned. The worst part was watching how other students followed Mrs. Davidson's lead. If the teacher ignored Minseo, they ignored her too. If the teacher treated her like she didn't belong, they did the same. During group work, Minseo was always the last person picked. Sometimes she ended up working alone because the groups were uneven, and nobody wanted to invite her to join them. There was one exception. A girl named Emma sat 2 rows ahead of Minseo. She had curly brown hair and always wore a silver bracelet on her left wrist. Emma never whispered about Minseo or laughed when Mrs. Davidson mispronounced her name. Sometimes when their eyes met, Emma would give a small, sympathetic smile. Minseo had spent those 3 weeks working on her Macbeth essay. Every day after school, she went straight to the library. She read the play 3 complete times. She read critical analyses by famous scholars. She took notes until her hand cramped. She looked up every word she didn't fully understand. She worked on her thesis statement for hours, rewriting it over and over until it was perfect. Her essay explored how Macbeth's ambition destroyed not just his life but his humanity. She wrote about how his first murder led to more murders, how each crime became easier, how he transformed from a respected soldier into a tyrant who saw threats everywhere. She connected the themes to human nature, to how power can corrupt even good people if they pursue it without moral boundaries. She was proud of her work. It was the best essay she had ever written. She printed it at the library, using money she had earned helping Mrs. Chen shelve books, and turned it in on the due date. Mrs. Davidson took it without comment and placed it on the pile with all the others. 2 weeks later, Mrs. Davidson returned the graded essays. She called students up one by one to receive their papers. "Excellent work, Michael," she said to a boy in the front row. "Your analysis of the symbolism was very sophisticated." "Well done, Sarah," she told a girl with a designer backpack. "I particularly enjoyed your discussion of Lady Macbeth's influence." When she called Minseo's name, she didn't smile. She held out the paper without making eye contact. Minseo took it and returned to her seat. Her hands were shaking as she turned to the last page, C-. The grade was circled in red ink. Below it, Mrs. Davidson had written, "Simplistic analysis. Lacks depth and original thinking. Your writing shows fundamental misunderstanding of the text. See me if you need additional support." Minseo read the comments twice, then 3 times. She felt like someone had punched her in the stomach. She flipped through the pages and saw red marks everywhere. Sentences were underlined with harsh notes. Too basic. Surface-level observation. This shows no real engagement with the material. She sat very still for the rest of class. She didn't hear anything Mrs. Davidson said. She just stared at that C- and felt something crack inside her chest. After class, she stayed in her seat while other students filed out. She looked at her essay again, trying to understand what she had done wrong. The arguments seemed solid. The evidence was there. She had quoted directly from the text and from scholarly sources. She had followed every requirement in the assignment guidelines. "Minseo," She looked up and saw Emma standing beside her desk. Up close, Minseo could see that Emma had kind eyes and a slight gap between her front teeth. "Are you okay?" Emma asked quietly. Minseo nodded quickly and started gathering her things. "Can I see your essay?" Emma asked. Minseo hesitated, then handed it over. Emma flipped through the pages, her eyebrows drawing together as she read Mrs. Davidson's comments. "This is really good," Emma said finally. "Your thesis is clear and you backed up everything with evidence. I don't understand why she gave you a C-." "Maybe she's right," Minseo said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Maybe I don't understand Shakespeare well enough." Emma bit her lip, then seemed to make a decision. "Wait here," she said. She went to her own bag and pulled out her essay. She handed it to Minseo. There was a large B+ circled at the top. Minseo read through Emma's essay. It was good, solid work. But it wasn't better than hers. If anything, Emma's analysis was less detailed. She had used fewer sources and made some of the same points Minseo had made, just with different wording. "Do you see what I see?" Emma asked softly. Minseo saw it. The two essays were similar in quality, but the grades were completely different. And the comments were different too. On Emma's paper, Mrs. Davidson had written encouraging notes. Good insight, interesting connection, well argued. "It's not fair," Emma said. "And it's not the first time. I've been watching how she treats you in class. It's wrong." Minseo felt her eyes start to burn. She blinked hard and handed Emma's essay back. "Thank you for showing me," she said quietly. Emma looked like she wanted to say more, but the bell rang for the next period. They both had to leave. As they walked out together, Emma said, "If you ever want to study together or something, let me know." Minseo nodded, but she didn't really believe it would happen. People said things like that to be polite. They didn't actually mean it. That evening, Minseo sat at the kitchen table with her essay spread out in front of her. Her mother came home from her first job and saw Minseo's face. "What's wrong?" she asked in Korean. Minseo showed her the grade. Her mother couldn't read English well, but she understood what C- meant. "Is this teacher not fair to you?" her mother asked. Minseo shrugged. "It doesn't matter." "It matters," her mother said firmly. She sat down across from Minseo, still wearing her cleaning company uniform. Her hands were red and rough from chemicals. "Are you thinking about dropping this class?" "Maybe I should," Minseo admitted. "Maybe I'm not smart enough for advanced English." Her mother reached across the table and took Minseo's hands. "Listen to me. You are smart, very smart. I know this because I am your mother, but also because I see how hard you work. You read all the time. You study every night. You understand things that I cannot understand. But the teacher thinks—" "I don't care what the teacher thinks," her mother interrupted. "Teachers are just people. Some people are fair. Some people are not fair. But you cannot let unfair people decide who you are." She squeezed Minseo's hands. "Show them who you really are. Show them they are wrong about you." Minseo felt tears running down her cheeks. She wiped them away quickly. "How?" she asked. Her mother smiled sadly. "You keep working hard. You keep being excellent. And you wait for your chance." That night, Minseo lay in bed and thought about what her mother said. Jun was already asleep in the other bed, breathing softly. Through the thin wall, she could hear their neighbor's television and someone arguing in the apartment above them. She thought about Mrs. Davidson's class and the way the teacher looked at her like she was less than the other students. She thought about the C- and Emma's B+. She thought about how it felt to raise her hand every day and be ignored. Then she thought about something else. Before bed, she had been browsing the school website on the library computer during her after-school session. She had seen an announcement about a district-wide literary competition. Students had to write an analysis of a classic text and present it to a panel of judges. The winner would receive a scholarship and recognition from the school district. Mrs. Davidson was listed as one of the evaluators for the competition. The announcement said that teachers could nominate students, but it also said any student could register independently through the online portal. Mincio stared at the ceiling and made a decision. She would enter that competition. She would work harder than anyone else. She would prove that she belonged in advanced English, that she could understand Shakespeare, that her ideas had value. Mrs. Davidson had already decided Mincio couldn't succeed. But Mincio was about to show her that some decisions were wrong. Some students couldn't be dismissed. Some voices refused to stay silent, even when everyone tried not to hear them. She would write an analysis that nobody could ignore. She would make them listen. And maybe, just maybe, she would teach Mrs. Davidson a lesson the teacher never expected to learn from a poor student girl who supposedly didn't belong. Mincio woke up the next morning with a new sense of purpose. The competition deadline was 6 weeks away. 6 weeks to create something extraordinary. 6 weeks to prove everyone wrong. Before school, she went to the library and used one of the computers to register for the competition. The registration form asked for basic information and what text she planned to analyze. Most students would probably choose the obvious works. Romeo and Juliet, Hamlet, the famous plays everyone knew about. Mincio thought carefully. She wanted to choose something meaningful, something that connected to her own experience but would show real understanding of Shakespeare's work. She scrolled through the list of acceptable texts and stopped when she reached The Merchant of Venice. She had read about this play in one of her research books. It dealt with prejudice, with being an outsider, with how society treated people who were different. It was about a Jewish moneylender named Shylock who lived in Venice, where Christians discriminated against him. But the play was complicated because Shylock was both a victim of prejudice and someone who sought cruel revenge. It wasn't simple. It was messy and uncomfortable, just like real life. Mincio selected The Merchant of Venice and submitted her registration. A confirmation email arrived in her school inbox immediately. She was officially entered in the district competition. Now came the hard part. She had to actually write the analysis and prepare a presentation, and she had to do it while keeping up with her regular schoolwork, helping at home and dealing with Mrs. Davidson's class every day. That week, Mincio's routine changed completely. She started waking up at 5 in the morning to read before school. She would sit at the kitchen table with a cup of instant coffee her mother left for her, going through The Merchant of Venice scene by scene. The language was difficult, even harder than Macbeth, but she worked through it slowly. After school, she went straight to the library. Mrs. Chen had noticed that Mincio came every single day now, always checking out the maximum number of books allowed. "You're very dedicated," Mrs. Chen said one afternoon. "What are you working on?" Mincio hesitated. She hadn't told anyone about the competition except for the registration form, but Mrs. Chen had been kind to her since the first day, and her eyes were genuinely interested. "There's a district literary competition," Mincio admitted. "I'm writing an analysis of Shakespeare." Mrs. Chen's face lit up. "That's wonderful. Which play?" "The Merchant of Venice." "Ah," Mrs. Chen said thoughtfully. "That's a challenging choice. Very complex themes." "I know," Mincio said, "but I think I understand it." "I'm sure you do," Mrs. Chen said. She went to her desk and wrote something down, then handed Mincio a piece of paper. "These are some academic databases you can access with your student login. They have scholarly articles that might help your research, much better than what you'll find in a regular internet search." Mincio looked at the paper. Mrs. Chen had written down 3 different database names and instructions for how to access them. "Thank you," she said, and meant it deeply. "Good luck," Mrs. Chen said. "Come find me if you need help with anything." Mincio started using the databases that same afternoon. She found articles written by university professors, detailed analyses of the play's themes, historical context about Jewish people in Shakespeare's England, and modern interpretations of the text. She took notes on everything, filling page after page of her notebook with ideas and quotes and connections. 3 evenings a week, Mincio worked at a convenience store near her apartment. The owner, Mr. Kim, was a Korean immigrant like her mother. He paid her in cash for 4-hour shifts. The money helped with bills and food. Her mother didn't like that Mincio worked during the school year, but they needed the income. "You should focus on studying," her mother always said. "I can do both," Mincio always replied. And she did. During slow periods at the store, when no customers came in, Mincio kept a copy of The Merchant of Venice under the counter. She would read a few pages, then help a customer, then read some more. She carried a small notebook in her pocket and wrote down ideas whenever they came to her. One evening, while restocking shelves, she had a breakthrough. The play wasn't really about whether Shylock was good or bad. It was about how prejudice dehumanizes everyone involved. The Christians in the play looked down on Shylock because he was Jewish, treating him cruelly and calling him names. So when Shylock demanded his revenge when he wanted his pound of flesh, he was responding to years of mistreatment. But his response made him cruel too. The prejudice had poisoned everyone. Minseo stopped in the middle of the store aisle, holding a box of instant noodles as the full analysis came together in her mind. She could connect this to modern society, how prejudice creates cycles of hurt and anger, how people who are discriminated against sometimes respond with bitterness, which then gets used as proof that they deserve discrimination in the first place. How no one wins when people are judged by their background instead of their character. She could write about this without mentioning her own experience directly, but anyone who read it carefully would understand. She would let Shakespeare's words carry the message, supported by scholarly research and thoughtful analysis. That night, she started writing. Her first draft was messy and too emotional. She threw it away and started again. The second draft was better, but still not right. She kept working, revising, cutting unnecessary words, strengthening her arguments. At school, Mrs. Davidson's behavior continued as before. She still mispronounced Minseo's name, still ignored her raised hand, still made subtle comments about cultural barriers and limited backgrounds. The other students followed the teacher's lead, keeping Minseo isolated and alone. One day, during class discussion about a sonnet, Minseo raised her hand to point out something about the metaphor Shakespeare used. Mrs. Davidson looked right at her raised hand, paused, and then called on a boy named Tyler instead. Tyler gave the exact same interpretation Minseo would have given. "Excellent observation, Tyler," Mrs. Davidson said warmly. "That shows real insight into Shakespeare's technique." Minseo slowly lowered her hand. Emma turned around from her seat and gave Minseo a sympathetic look. It helped a little, but not much. After class, Emma caught up with Minseo in the hallway. "That was your answer," she said. "You had your hand up first, and she called on Tyler, and he said exactly what you were going to say." "It's okay," Minseo said quietly. "It's not okay," Emma insisted. "None of this is okay." She paused, then asked, "Do you want to have lunch together today?" Minseo looked at her in surprise. "Really?" "Yeah, really," Emma said. "I usually sit with some people from my art class. They're nice." "You should join us," Minseo hesitated. She had been eating lunch alone for over a month now. Part of her wanted to say yes desperately, but another part was afraid. What if Emma's friends didn't want her there? What if they treated her like Mrs. Davidson did? "You don't have to if you don't want to," Emma said quickly, misreading Minseo's silence. "I just thought—" "I'd like that," Minseo interrupted. "Thank you." At lunch, Emma introduced Minseo to 3 other students. There was Marcus, who was tall and always drawing in a sketchbook. Sophia, who had bright red hair and wore vintage band t-shirts. And James, who was quiet but smiled easily. They all said hi and made room for Minseo at their table without any awkwardness. They talked about normal things. A new movie that had just come out. A difficult physics test. Sophia's upcoming art show. Nobody asked Minseo invasive questions about where she was from or why her lunch looked different. They just treated her like a regular person. "How are you finding Riverside so far?" Marcus asked. "It's okay," Minseo said. "Different from my old school." "I bet," Sophia said. "This place can be pretty snobby sometimes. Lots of rich kids who think they're better than everyone else." "Sophia," Emma said warningly. "What?" "It's true," Sophia said. "But not everyone's like that. Most people are decent once you get to know them." Minseo felt something loosen in her chest. These people were being genuinely kind. They weren't doing it because a teacher told them to or because they felt sorry for her. They were just being friendly. "Hey, Emma mentioned you're really good at English," James said. "Could you maybe look at my essay sometime? Mrs. Davidson always gives me bad grades and I can't figure out what she wants." "I'm not that good," Minseo said automatically. "Mrs. Davidson gave me a C- on my last essay." All 4 of them looked surprised. "Seriously?" Marcus said. "But Emma said your essay was really good when she read it." Emma looked embarrassed. "I just said it seemed well written to me." "It was well written," Minseo said. "But maybe I don't understand Shakespeare the way Mrs. Davidson wants us to." Or maybe Mrs. Davidson is biased, Sophia said bluntly. She's known for having favorites. If you're not in her special group, you don't get good grades no matter what you do. Mincio didn't know what to say to that. It felt dangerous to agree out loud, even though she suspected it was true. They finished lunch talking about other things, and Mincio felt lighter than she had in weeks. Having friends, even new ones, made school feel less lonely, but she didn't tell them about the competition. That was her secret project, something she was building on her own. Every day she worked on her analysis, refining her arguments, finding better evidence, making her writing stronger. She practiced her presentation in her bedroom late at night, speaking quietly so she wouldn't wake Jun. Her younger brother had noticed something was different. "Why are you always reading that same book?" he asked one evening. "School project," Mincio said. "You never used to work this much," Jun observed. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," she assured him. "Just want to do well." But it was more than that. Every time she worked on her competition analysis, every time she refined another paragraph or found another piece of supporting evidence, she thought about Mrs. Davidson's classroom. She thought about being ignored and dismissed and judged before she even had a chance to prove herself. This competition was her chance. Not just to win, though winning would be wonderful, but to show that she was exactly as smart and capable as any other student in that school, to prove that poverty didn't determine intelligence, that having an immigrant mother didn't make her less than, that second-hand clothes and simple lunches didn't reflect what was in her mind and heart. 4 weeks until the competition deadline. Mincio printed out her analysis and read it carefully. It was good, really good, but it could be better. She started another revision, strengthening her conclusion, adding one more scholarly source, polishing every sentence until it shone. Mrs. Chen read through a draft and nodded approvingly. "This is college-level work," she said. "You should be proud." But Mincio wouldn't be proud until it was finished. Until it was perfect. Until it was something that nobody, not even Mrs. Davidson, could dismiss or ignore. She worked through exhaustion, through late nights and early mornings, through aching hands and tired eyes. She kept going because she had something to prove, not to Mrs. Davidson, but to herself. She would show everyone who she really was, and then they would have to listen. Mincio submitted her competition entry on a Tuesday evening, exactly 1 hour before the deadline. She had revised the analysis 17 times, checked every citation twice, and rehearsed her presentation until she could deliver it in her sleep. When she finally clicked the submit button on the library computer, her hands were shaking. The confirmation email said results would be announced in 3 weeks. 3 weeks of waiting and wondering. 3 weeks of continuing. With regular school, while her competition entry was being judged by people she had never met, life went on as usual. Mrs. Davidson's class remained. The same difficult experience it had always been. Mincio still raised her hand and got ignored. She still received lower grades than her work deserved. She still heard the subtle comments about cultural barriers and limited backgrounds. But something had shifted inside Mincio. She had done something important, something brave, and that knowledge carried her through the difficult days. She sat in Mrs. Davidson's class and thought about her competition analysis, about the hours of research and careful writing, about the argument she had built word by word. No matter what Mrs. Davidson thought of her, Mincio knew what she was capable of. Emma had become a real friend. They ate lunch together every day now, along with Marcus, Sophia, and James. Sometimes they studied together in the library after school. Emma was careful never to mention Mrs. Davidson's unfair treatment in front of the others. But Mincio knew Emma saw it and cared about it. One afternoon in Mrs. Davidson's class, something happened that almost made Mincio smile. Mrs. Davidson was discussing a poem and made a claim about the author's intent. Mincio knew it was wrong. She had read 3 different analyses of that exact poem while researching for her competition entry, and every scholar agreed on a different interpretation than what Mrs. Davidson was presenting. She didn't raise her hand or correct the teacher. She just sat quietly knowing the truth, while Mrs. Davidson taught something incorrect to the whole class. Tyler and Sarah and the other favorite students took careful notes on the wrong information. Mincio wrote down the correct interpretation in her own notebook. Knowledge was power, she realized. Real knowledge, earned through hard work and genuine understanding, couldn't be taken away by someone else's prejudice. Mrs. Davidson could ignore her in class, But the teacher couldn't touch what Minseo carried in her mind. 3 weeks passed slowly. Minseo tried not to think about the competition, but it was always there in the back of her mind. What if she hadn't made the cut? What if her analysis wasn't as good as she thought? What if the judges had looked at her name, her school, her background, and dismissed her just like Mrs. Davidson did? She pushed those thoughts away and focused on her work. She had done her best. That was all anyone could do. On a Thursday morning, 3 weeks and 2 days after submitting her entry, Minseo was sitting in Mrs. Davidson's class when there was a knock on the classroom door. Mrs. Davidson looked annoyed at the interruption. She opened the door and spoke briefly with someone in the hallway. Then she turned back to the class and her face had a strange expression. "Minseo," she said, pronouncing the name awkwardly as always. "You're wanted in the principal's office." The classroom went quiet. Everyone knew that getting called to the principal's office usually meant trouble. A few students turned to look at Minseo with curious or sympathetic expressions. Mrs. Davidson's face showed something that might have been satisfaction, like she had been expecting this. Minseo gathered her book slowly, her heart pounding. She couldn't think of anything she had done wrong, but the principal's secretary had sounded serious. She walked down the empty hallway, her footsteps echoing off the tile floors. The principal's office was on the first floor, behind a heavy wooden door with a frosted glass window. Minseo knocked quietly. "Come in," a voice called. She opened the door and stopped in surprise. Principal Williams sat behind his desk, but he wasn't alone. There was a woman in a business suit standing by the window, and a man with glasses sitting in one of the chairs. Minseo had never seen either of them before. "Minseo, please come in and sit down," Principal Williams said. He was smiling, which was confusing. People didn't usually smile when you were in trouble. Minseo sat in the empty chair, holding her books tightly against her chest. "Minseo, this is Dr. Patricia Chen, the district superintendent," Principal Williams said, gesturing to the woman. "And this is Mr. Robert Martinez, the coordinator for the district literary competition." Minseo's breath caught in her throat. "The competition?" "Minseo," Dr. Chen said warmly, "we're very pleased to inform you that you've been selected as one of 5 finalists in the district literary competition." The words didn't make sense at first. Minseo heard them, but her brain couldn't process what they meant. "I'm sorry, what?" she said quietly. Mr. Martinez leaned forward, his eyes kind behind his glasses. "Out of 300 entries from 30 different schools across the district, your analysis of The Merchant of Venice was selected as one of the 5 best. We were extremely impressed with your work. The sophistication of your argument was remarkable," Dr. Chen added. "Your interpretation was both original and well-supported. You connected classical themes to contemporary social issues in a way that showed genuine critical thinking." Minseo felt dizzy. "I'm a finalist?" she repeated, needing to hear it again to believe it. "Yes," Principal Williams said. He looked genuinely proud, which was strange because Minseo had barely spoken to him before. "This is a tremendous honor for you and for our school. The final round will be in 2 weeks," Mr. Martinez explained. "You'll present your analysis to a panel of judges that includes university professors and district officials. Each finalist will have 15 minutes to present, followed by questions from the panel. We wanted to inform you in person and give you time to prepare," Dr. Chen said. "Do you have any questions?" Minseo had about 1,000 questions, but she could only manage to ask, "Who are the other finalists?" Mr. Martinez pulled out a paper. "Let's see. There's David Zhang from Westbrook Preparatory, Jennifer Wu from Eastside Academy, Christopher Brown from Millbrook High, and Aisha Patel from Riverside High." "Wait," Minseo said. "Aisha is from this school too?" "Yes," Principal Williams said. "We have 2 finalists from Riverside, which is quite unusual. You should both be very proud." Minseo didn't know Aisha well. She was a senior, a year ahead, and she was one of Mrs. Davidson's favorite students, smart, confident, from a wealthy family. The kind of student who always got called on in class. "There's one more thing," Mr. Martinez said. "The 3 students your teacher, Mrs. Davidson, officially nominated for the competition didn't advance past the preliminary round. We don't usually share this information, but given that you're both from the same school, I thought you should know." Something cold settled in Minseo's stomach. Mrs. Davidson had nominated 3 students. None of them had made it to finals. But Minseo, the student Mrs. Davidson had dismissed and ignored and graded unfairly, was now a finalist. How did Mrs. Davidson react when you told her? Mincio asked quietly. The three adults exchanged glances. We haven't informed her yet, Principal Williams admitted. We wanted to tell you first, but we'll be making an announcement to the whole school this afternoon. Mincio imagined Mrs. Davidson's face when she heard the news. The thought shouldn't have made her feel satisfied, but it did. Just a little. I need to get back to class, Mincio said, standing up. Her legs felt shaky. Of course, Dr. Chen said. Congratulations again, Mincio. We're looking forward to your presentation. Mincio left the office and walked slowly back toward Mrs. Davidson's classroom. The hallway seemed different somehow, brighter and bigger. She was a finalist. Out of 300 students, she was one of 5. People who didn't know her name or her background or what kind of clothes she wore had read her work and thought it was excellent. When she reached room 204, she paused outside the door. Through the small window, she could see Mrs. Davidson at the whiteboard, writing something about metaphors. Tyler and Sarah sat in the front row taking careful notes. Emma was looking toward the door, probably wondering where Mincio was. Mincio took a deep breath and opened the door. Every eye in the classroom turned toward her. Mrs. Davidson looked up from the whiteboard, her marker paused in midair. Is everything all right? Mrs. Davidson asked. There was something in her tone like she was expecting bad news. Yes, Mincio said. Everything is fine. She walked to her desk and sat down. She could feel Mrs. Davidson watching her, probably curious about why she had been called to the office. But Mincio didn't explain. She just opened her notebook and pretended to pay attention to the lesson. Emma leaned back slightly and whispered, What happened? Tell you at lunch, Mincio whispered back. The rest of the class period dragged on forever. Mrs. Davidson kept glancing at Mincio with an expression that was hard to read. Suspicious, maybe, or concerned. Finally, the bell rang. Students began packing up their things. Mincio was gathering her books when the intercom crackled to life. Attention, students and staff, Principal Williams' voice said through the speakers. I have some exciting news to share. We have 2 students from Riverside High who have been selected as finalists in the district literary competition. This is a tremendous achievement. Please join me in congratulating seniors Aisha Patel and sophomore Mincio Park. The classroom went completely silent. Mincio kept her eyes on her desk, but she could feel everyone staring at her. She heard someone gasp. She heard Tyler whisper, No way. She finally looked up and saw Mrs. Davidson standing frozen at the front of the room. The teacher's face had gone very pale. Her mouth was slightly open, like she had been about to say something and forgotten what it was. Their eyes met across the classroom. For one long moment, neither of them looked away. Mincio saw shock in Mrs. Davidson's expression and disbelief in something else, something that might have been the first flicker of understanding that she had been very, very wrong. Emma was the first person to move. She turned around in her seat and said loudly, Congratulations, Mincio. That's amazing. Marcus and James, who were also in the class, started clapping. Then a few other students joined in. Not everyone, but enough that it felt like genuine celebration. Mincio stood up and walked toward the door. She had to pass Mrs. Davidson's desk on the way out. As she approached, Mrs. Davidson seemed to recover from her shock. Mincio, the teacher said, her voice strained. This is quite surprising. Congratulations. Thank you, Mincio said politely. She didn't smile. She didn't show any emotion at all. Mrs. Davidson cleared her throat. I had nominated 3 students for the competition. Tyler, Sarah, and Jennifer. I'm curious why you didn't ask for my guidance when entering. The registration was open to all students, Mincio said simply. I didn't need a nomination. Yes, but as your teacher, I could have helped you prepare. I could have reviewed your work. Mincio looked at the C- essay in her bag, the one covered in harsh red marks that said her work was simplistic and showed no real understanding. She looked back at Mrs. Davidson. I managed on my own, Mincio said quietly. Thank you anyway. She walked out of the classroom, leaving Mrs. Davidson standing alone at her desk, surrounded by the silence of everything she had been wrong about. In the hallway, Emma caught up with her, practically bouncing with excitement. A finalist. Mincio, this is incredible. You have to tell me everything. Mincio let herself smile then, really smile for the first time in weeks. At lunch, she promised. I'll tell you everything at lunch. As they walked down the hallway together, Mincio felt something she hadn't felt since starting at Riverside High. She felt proud. She felt worthy. She felt seen. Mrs. Davidson had tried to make her invisible, but Minseo had found a way to be seen anyway. Not by asking permission, not by waiting to be called on, but by working harder than everyone else, believing in herself when no one else did, and proving through her own excellence that she deserved to be heard. The competition was in 2 weeks. 2 weeks to prepare her presentation. 2 weeks before she would stand in front of judges and show them what a poor student girl from a difficult background could accomplish when given a fair chance. Mrs. Davidson would be there, watching. And this time she would have no choice but to listen. The news spread through Riverside High like fire. By the end of the day, everyone knew that Minseo Park, the quiet girl who ate lunch alone and wore secondhand clothes, was a finalist in the most prestigious academic competition in the district. Some students congratulated her in the hallways. Others just stared with surprised expressions like they were seeing her for the first time. A few whispered to their friends, probably wondering how the poor transfer student had accomplished something that Tyler and Sarah, Mrs. Davidson's star pupils, had failed to do. Minseo tried to ignore all of it. She had 2 weeks to prepare her presentation, and she couldn't waste time worrying about what people thought. At lunch, she told Emma, Marcus, Sophia, and James the whole story. How she had registered for the competition on her own. How she had worked on her analysis for weeks while keeping it secret. How she had submitted it and tried not to hope too much. "This is the best thing ever," Sophia declared. "I mean, Mrs. Davidson nominated 3 people and none of them made it, but you did. That's perfect." "It's not about Mrs. Davidson," Minseo said quietly, though that wasn't entirely true. "Maybe not for you," Emma said gently, "but it's definitely about her for everyone else. She's been so unfair to you all semester." Minseo's mother cried when she heard the news. She came home from work that evening and found Minseo at the kitchen table practicing her presentation. When Minseo explained what had happened, her mother wrapped her in a tight hug and cried into her daughter's hair. "I knew you could do it," her mother said in Korean. "I always knew. I haven't won yet," Minseo reminded her. "There are 4 other finalists. You already won," her mother said firmly. "You proved you belong. That's everything." But Minseo wanted more than that. She wanted to actually win the competition. She wanted the scholarship money that would help her family. She wanted the recognition. She wanted to stand on that stage and show everyone, including herself, that she was the best. The next 2 weeks were the hardest of Minseo's life. She went to school, worked at the convenience store, helped at home, and spent every spare moment preparing her presentation. She practiced in front of the bathroom mirror. She practiced on her way to school. She practiced in her head during classes. Mrs. Chen helped her create visual aids using the library's computer, simple slides that highlighted her main points, without being distracting. Mrs. Chen also listened to Minseo's practice presentations and offered gentle suggestions about pacing and emphasis. "You're ready," Mrs. Chen told her 3 days before the competition. "You know this material inside and out. Just be yourself and speak from your heart." Mrs. Davidson's behavior changed after the announcement. She started calling on Minseo in class occasionally, though her tone remained cold. She never mispronounced Minseo's name anymore, probably because she knew other people were watching now. She even offered to help with the presentation preparation, an offer Minseo declined politely. "I appreciate it, but I've already prepared," Minseo said. Mrs. Davidson's face tightened, but she didn't push. "Well, good luck," she said, though the words sounded forced. On the evening before the competition, Minseo couldn't sleep. She lay in bed running through her presentation over and over. June had wished her good luck before falling asleep. Her mother had taken the morning shift off at both jobs so she could attend the presentation. Losing those wages would hurt, but her mother insisted. "I will be there watching you," her mother had said. "Nothing is more important than that." Minseo finally fell asleep around 2 in the morning and woke up at 6 feeling exhausted and nervous. She put on her school uniform, the same faded one she wore every day, and tried to smooth out the wrinkles. She wished she had something nicer to wear, but this was all she had. Her mother made her favorite breakfast, rice, eggs, and kimchi. Minseo could barely eat, but she forced herself to finish half of it. She needed the energy. They took the bus to the district auditorium together. It was a large building with a fancy lobby and polished floors that reflected the ceiling lights. Other finalists were arriving with their families. Minseo saw Aisha Patel with her parents, both dressed in expensive clothes. Aisha wore a professional-looking dress and carried a leather folder. Minseo looked down at her own appearance. Faded uniform, scuffed shoes, notes printed on regular paper, and held together with a cheap plastic folder from the dollar store. She suddenly felt very small. "You look beautiful," her mother said, squeezing her hand. "You look like someone who worked hard and earned her place here." The 5 finalists were called backstage for a briefing. Mr. Martinez explained the format one more time. 15 minutes to present, then 5 minutes for questions from the judges. They would present in alphabetical order by last name. That meant Aisha Patel would go fourth and Minseo would go last. Minseo would have to sit and wait through 4 other presentations before her turn came. 4 presentations to get more and more nervous. 4 chances to lose her confidence. The auditorium filled with people, teachers from various schools, district officials, some parents and students. Minseo peeked through the curtain and saw her mother sitting in the 3rd row, looking small and nervous in her cleaning company uniform. She saw Mrs. Davidson near the back, sitting with a stiff posture and an unreadable expression. The competition began. David Zhang from Westbrook Preparatory went first. He analyzed Hamlet with a focus on the theme of madness. His presentation was polished and confident. He spoke without notes and answered the judges' questions smoothly. When he finished, people applauded. Minseo's hand started sweating. Jennifer Wu from Eastside Academy went second. She discussed Romeo and Juliet and the role of fate versus free will. Her visual aids were professional, probably made by a graphic designer. She had obviously practiced for hours. The judges nodded approvingly during her presentation. Minseo felt her confidence slipping. Christopher Brown from Millbrook High went third. He analyzed Othello and themes of jealousy and manipulation. He was articulate and well-prepared. One of the judges, a professor with white hair and glasses, smiled during his presentation and asked him an encouraging question afterward. Minseo's stomach hurt. Then it was Aisha's turn. She walked on stage looking calm and professional. She presented her analysis of King Lear with confidence and sophistication. She made jokes that made the judges laugh. She referenced additional texts and scholarly sources with ease. When she finished, the applause was enthusiastic. Now it was Minseo's turn. Her last chance. Her only chance. Mr. Martinez called her name. "Our final presenter is Minseo Park from Riverside High School, analyzing The Merchant of Venice." Minseo stood up on shaking legs. She walked onto the stage, and the bright lights made it hard to see the audience. She found her mother's face in the crowd. Her mother smiled at her, and that smile said everything. "I believe in you. I'm proud of you. You can do this." Minseo set up her simple visual aids and positioned herself at the podium. She looked out at the judges. 5 people sitting at a long table watching her with neutral expressions, waiting to see what she could do. She took a deep breath and began. The Merchant of Venice is often called a comedy, but there is very little that is funny about it. It is a play about prejudice, about what happens when people are judged not by their character but by their religion, their background or their place in society. Her voice shook on the first few words, but then it steadied. She had practiced this hundreds of times. She knew every word, every argument, every piece of evidence. The character of Shylock is hated by the Christians in Venice because he is Jewish. They call him names. They spit on him. They treat him as less than human, and then they are surprised when he acts without mercy, when he demands his pound of flesh as payment for a debt. Minseo moved through her analysis, building her argument piece by piece. She talked about how prejudice dehumanizes both the victim and the perpetrator, how people who are constantly discriminated against may become bitter or angry, which is then used as justification for more discrimination, how the cycle continues, hurting everyone involved. She quoted from the play, Shylock's famous speech, "Hath not a Jew eyes? Hath not a Jew hands, organs, dimensions, senses, affections, passions? If you prick us, do we not bleed? If you tickle us, do we not laugh? If you poison us, do we not die?" Her voice grew stronger as she spoke those words. She was no longer just presenting an academic analysis. She was speaking about something real, something that mattered. Shakespeare shows us that when we treat people as outsiders, when we judge them based on superficial differences, we create a world where everyone loses. The Christians in the play think they are superior, but their prejudice makes them cruel. Shylock thinks his revenge is justified, but it makes him cruel too. Nobody wins. Nobody grows. Nobody learns. She connected the themes to modern society, to discrimination based on race, religion, economic status. She didn't mention her own experience directly, but her emotion was clear in every word. We still live in a world where people are judged before they are known, where assumptions are made based on appearance or background, where some voices are heard while others are ignored. The Merchant of Venice reminds us that this has been true for hundreds of years, but it also challenges us to do better, to see people as individuals, to listen to voices that are different from our own, to recognize that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and given a fair chance to prove their worth. She finished with her conclusion, tying everything together. When she spoke the final sentence, she looked directly at Mrs. Davidson in the back of the auditorium. Shakespeare teaches us that prejudice is a choice, and if it is a choice, then it can be changed. We can choose to see people clearly, to judge them by their character and actions rather than by categories and stereotypes. That is the real lesson of this play. That is the lesson we still need to learn. The auditorium was completely silent for a moment after she finished. Then the applause began. It started with her mother, who was clapping so hard her hands must have hurt. Then others joined in. Min-seo saw one of the judges, a woman with dark hair, nodding with what looked like genuine approval. The judges asked their questions. They were challenging questions, but good ones. They asked about her interpretation of specific scenes. They asked how she connected classical text to modern themes. They asked what scholars she had consulted. Min-seo answered each question carefully and honestly. Her research had been thorough. She knew this play better than she knew anything else. She could support every claim she had made. When the questions ended, the white-haired professor smiled at her. That was truly impressive critical thinking, he said. The kind of analysis we hope to see in our university students. Thank you. Min-seo walked off stage feeling like she was floating. She had done it. She had presented her work to those judges and they had listened. Really listened. Not because they had to, but because her ideas were worth hearing. The judges deliberated while all 5 finalists waited backstage. Aisha came over and said, "Your presentation was really good. I didn't expect you to choose that play." "Thank you," Min-seo said. "Yours was excellent, too." They waited for what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 minutes. Finally, Mr. Martinez came backstage and called them all out. They stood in a line on the stage while Dr. Chen approached the podium to announce the results. Min-seo found her mother's face in the crowd again. Her mother was crying already, and the results hadn't even been announced yet. All 5 of these students demonstrated exceptional analytical skills, Dr. Chen began. We are proud of each of them. However, one presentation stood out for its originality, depth of research, and the way it connected classical themes to contemporary relevance. Min-seo's heart pounded so hard she thought, everyone must be able to hear it. The first-place winner of this year's district literary competition, earning a $5,000 scholarship and district recognition, is Min-seo Park from Riverside High School. The world seemed to stop for a moment. Min-seo heard the words, but they felt impossible. First place. She had won. She had actually won. Her mother's cry of joy broke through her shock. Then there was applause, loud and genuine. Dr. Chen was smiling at her, holding out a certificate and a large trophy. Min-seo walked forward on numb legs and accepted them. "Congratulations," Dr. Chen said warmly. "Your work was truly outstanding." The applause continued as Min-seo stood there holding her trophy, trying not to cry. She looked out at the audience and saw her mother standing, clapping with tears streaming down her face. She saw Mrs. Chen from the library beaming with pride. She saw Emma and her other friends who must have skipped class to attend, cheering loudly, and she saw Mrs. Davidson. The teacher was still sitting, not standing like most others. Her face was pale, her hands barely moving in mechanical applause. She looked shocked. She looked uncomfortable. She looked like someone who had just realized something very important that she should have known all along. Their eyes met across the crowded auditorium. Min-seo didn't smile or show any triumph. She just looked at her teacher steadily, letting that moment stretch out, letting Mrs. Davidson fully understand what had just happened. A poor student girl, an immigrant's daughter, someone with second-hand clothes and simple lunches, someone Mrs. Davidson had dismissed and ignored and graded unfairly. That girl was now holding a first-place trophy, recognized by the entire district as having the best critical thinking and analytical skills of any student in any school. Mrs. Davidson looked away first. Minseo saw her stand up and quickly leave the auditorium, disappearing through the back doors before the ceremony was even finished. But Minseo didn't watch her go. She turned back to the audience, to her mother's proud tears and her friends' happy faces, to Mrs. Chen's encouraging smile and Dr. Chen's congratulations. She had worked so hard for this moment. She deserved to enjoy it. The Monday after the competition, Minseo returned to school as a different person. Not different on the outside. She still wore the same faded uniform and carried the same worn backpack. But inside, something fundamental had changed. She walked through the hallways with her head high, and students she had never spoken to before congratulated her. "Great job at the competition," a senior boy said as he passed her locker. "I heard your presentation was amazing," a girl from her math class told her. Even some teacher stopped her to offer, "Congratulations." Mr. Lopez shook her hand and said he always knew she was brilliant. Ms. Park gave her a warm hug and said the school was lucky to have redistributing. The principal called a special assembly for that afternoon. The entire school gathered in the auditorium. Principal Williams stood at the podium with Minseo and Aisha beside him. He talked about how proud he was of both students, how they had represented Riverside High with distinction. Minseo Park's first-place finish is a testament to hard work, dedication, and exceptional critical thinking, he announced. She has earned a $5,000 scholarship and brought great honor to our school. The auditorium erupted in applause. Minseo stood there feeling exposed and proud at the same time. She saw Emma and her friends cheering loudly in the middle section. She saw Mrs. Chen in the back wiping tears from her eyes. Then Principal Williams called Mrs. Davidson to the stage. The teacher walked up slowly, her face carefully blank. She was holding a certificate, the official school recognition that would go in Minseo's student file. Mrs. Davidson stood in front of Minseo, and for a moment, neither of them moved. The whole auditorium watched in silence. Everyone knew about the tension between them. Everyone had seen how Mrs. Davidson treated Minseo in class. "Congratulations, Minseo," Mrs. Davidson said, her voice flat. She held out the certificate. Minseo took it. "Thank you," she said politely. She didn't smile. She didn't show any emotion at all. She just accepted what was hers by right and met Mrs. Davidson's eyes with steady confidence. Mrs. Davidson turned away quickly and left the stage. Minseo watched her go, feeling a complicated mix of emotions. Satisfaction, yes, but also something like pity. Mrs. Davidson had spent weeks judging Minseo unfairly, and in the end, all she had accomplished was proving herself wrong. After the assembly, Principal Williams asked Minseo to come to his office. She went nervously, wondering if something was wrong. But when she arrived, she found not just the principal but also a woman in a dark suit who introduced herself as Ms. Rodriguez, the district equity officer. "Minseo, please sit down," Principal Williams said gently. "You're not in any trouble. We just need to discuss something important." Ms. Rodriguez opened a folder on her lap. "Several students have come forward with concerns about Mrs. Davidson's classroom environment," she said carefully. "They've reported instances of what appears to be discriminatory treatment." "Your name came up repeatedly." Minseo's stomach twisted. "I don't want to get anyone in trouble," she said quickly. "You're not getting anyone in trouble," Ms. Rodriguez assured her. "These students came forward on their own because they were concerned about fairness. We take these reports very seriously. Can you tell me about your experience in Mrs. Davidson's class?" Minseo hesitated. Part of her wanted to protect Mrs. Davidson to avoid making waves. But another part of her, the part that had worked so hard and been ignored so many times, wanted to tell the truth. She told them everything. About how Mrs. Davidson refused to pronounce her name correctly. About being ignored when she raised her hand even though she knew the answers. About the C- on her essay when Emma's nearly identical work received a B+. About the subtle comments about cultural barriers and limited backgrounds. Ms. Rodriguez took notes while Minseo spoke. Principal Williams looked increasingly uncomfortable. When Minseo finished, there was a long silence. "I'm very sorry you experienced this," Principal Williams said finally. "It should never have happened. Mrs. Davidson will be required to complete bias training and will be monitoring her classroom more closely." "What about my grade in her class?" Minseo asked quietly. My participation score is low because she never calls on me even when I raise my hand. We'll be reviewing your grades, Ms. Rodriguez said. If there's evidence of unfair grading practices, adjustments will be made. And going forward, I want you to document any instances where you feel you're being treated unfairly. Write down dates, times, and specific details. Mincio nodded, feeling a strange sense of relief mixed with guilt. She left the office knowing that change was coming, whether she had wanted to cause it or not. Over the next few weeks, Mrs. Davidson's teaching style changed noticeably. She called on Mincio regularly now, though her tone remained stiff and formal. She pronounced Mincio's name correctly every single time. She gave more balanced grades across all students. But there was something performative about it all. Like she was going through motions because she had to, not because she had truly changed her beliefs. The warmth she showed her favorite students was still there. The genuine enthusiasm in her voice when Tyler or Sarah answered a question. But now she distributed that warmth more carefully, making sure everyone got at least a little attention. It was an improvement, but it wasn't real growth. It was compliance, not transformation. Min SEO found that she didn't care as much anymore. Mrs. Davidson's opinion, which had once felt so important, now seemed almost irrelevant. Min SEO had proven herself in a bigger arena. She had earned recognition from university professors and district officials. She had won a scholarship that would help her go to college. Mrs. Davidson's approval was no longer something she needed. In fact, something interesting happened as the weeks passed. Other students started coming to Mincio for help with their English assignments. They asked her opinion on their essays before turning them in. They wanted to study with her for tests. Mincio became known as one of the best students in English literature, not just in Mrs. Davidson's class, but in the whole school. The scholarship money made a real difference for Mincio's family. Her mother was able to quit one of her 2 jobs and spend more time at home. They could afford better food, new school supplies, and some small repairs to their apartment. The financial stress that had always hung over their household lifted just a little, but the real change was in how Mincio saw herself. She had arrived at Riverside High feeling like an outsider, someone who didn't belong. She had let Mrs. Davidson's treatment reinforce that feeling, had almost believed she wasn't as smart or capable as the other students. Now she knew the truth. She belonged anywhere she chose to be. Her worth wasn't determined by her clothes or her lunch or what language her mother spoke at home. College acceptance letters started arriving in early spring. Mincio had applied to 6 universities, all of them offering strong English programs. 5 of them accepted her. Several offered additional scholarships on top of the competition prize. Her competition essay and the story of overcoming discrimination had made her application stand out. She chose a state university 3 hours away, one with an excellent literature program and generous financial aid. It meant leaving home, which was scary, but it also meant starting fresh somewhere new. On one of her last days at Riverside High, Mincio was working in the library when Mrs. Davidson walked in. The teacher stopped when she saw Mincio, and for a moment it looked like she might leave. But then she walked over to the table where Mincio sat surrounded by books. "Mincio," Mrs. Davidson said, "may I speak with you for a moment?" "Of course," Mincio said, closing her book. Mrs. Davidson sat down across from her. She looked older than she had at the beginning of the year and tired. "I heard you've been accepted to several excellent universities," she said. "Yes," Mincio said. "I'm going to State University in the fall." "That's wonderful." Mrs. Davidson paused, seeming to struggle with her words. I wanted to say that I'm glad you entered that competition. Your work was truly exceptional." "Thank you," Mincio said carefully. Another pause. Mrs. Davidson looked down at her hands. "I should have seen your potential from the beginning. I should have encouraged you instead of—" She trailed off, not finishing the sentence. Mincio waited, but Mrs. Davidson didn't continue. There was no real apology, no acknowledgement of the specific harm she had caused. Just a vague admission that something had been wrong. "I hope you do well at university," Mrs. Davidson said finally, standing up. "Thank you," Mincio said again. "I hope your future students have a better experience than I did." It was the closest she came to expressing her anger directly. Mrs. Davidson flinched slightly, then nodded and walked away. Mincio watched her go and realized she felt no satisfaction from that small confrontation. Mrs. Davidson would probably never truly understand what she had done wrong. She would probably never examine her own biases deeply enough to change them at their root. But that wasn't Minseo's responsibility anymore. Some people learned from their mistakes. Some people grew and changed. And some people just learned to hide their prejudices better, while keeping them intact underneath. Mrs. Davidson would continue teaching, would continue having students, would continue making judgments. Minseo hoped the oversight from the district would keep her more accountable. But she wasn't naive enough to think one competition had transformed Mrs. Davidson into a fair teacher. But it didn't matter, because Minseo was moving forward. She had learned something much more valuable than Mrs. Davidson had learned. She had learned that her worth didn't depend on other people's recognition, that she could achieve excellence even when people doubted her. That hard work and genuine skill could overcome prejudice, even if they couldn't eliminate it entirely. 3 months later, Minseo started a summer program at the library. She tutored younger students from families like hers, kids who came from difficult backgrounds and needed someone to believe in them. She saw herself in their faces. The uncertainty, the fear of not being good enough, the weight of other people's low expectations. "You can do this," she told a 12-year-old girl who was struggling with a book report. "I know it's hard, and I know some people might not think you can succeed. But they're wrong. You're smart and capable, and your background doesn't determine your future." The girl looked up at her with hope in her eyes, and Minseo saw her younger self looking back. One afternoon, while working at the library, Minseo saw Mrs. Davidson through the window. The teacher was walking down the sidewalk with another woman, probably a colleague. They were talking and laughing about something. Mrs. Davidson looked relaxed and happy, unburdened by guilt or regret. Minseo watched her for a moment, and for the first time since starting at Riverside High, she felt no anger. Mrs. Davidson had taught her something valuable after all, though not what the teacher intended. She had taught Minseo that some battles are won, not through confrontation but through persistence, that the best response to being underestimated is to exceed all expectations quietly and undeniably. Mrs. Davidson had tried to make Minseo believe she didn't belong in advanced English. Instead, she had motivated Minseo to prove she belonged everywhere. The teacher had tried to diminish her and instead had pushed her toward greatness. There was irony in that. A lesson Mrs. Davidson never meant to teach, learned by a student the teacher had tried to ignore. Behind every prejudiced teacher who underestimates a student lies a lesson they never expected. Sometimes that lesson is learned by the student, who discovers strength and determination they didn't know they possessed. Sometimes it's learned by the teacher, who realizes too late that talent and worth cannot be determined by appearance or background. And sometimes, in the best cases, the lesson spreads beyond just those two people. Other students who witnessed Minseo's journey learned that speaking up against unfairness matters. Emma and her friends had found the courage to report Mrs. Davidson's behavior because they saw it was wrong. The school administration had been forced to confront bias in their classrooms. The other teachers had been reminded to examine their own assumptions about students. Minseo turned away from the window and back to the young girl she was tutoring. This was her purpose now, not revenge against Mrs. Davidson, not even seeking an apology, but helping other students who faced the same struggles she had faced, being the person she had needed when she first walked through those school doors wearing a secondhand uniform and feeling like she didn't belong. "Let's try this paragraph again," Minseo said gently. "Read it slowly and this time tell me what you think it means. Not what you think I want to hear. What you actually think." The girl read carefully, then looked up. "I think the character is scared but trying to be brave." "Yes," Minseo said, smiling. "That's exactly right, see? You understand this better than you thought you did." The girl smiled back, a little less uncertain now. Outside the library window, Mrs. Davidson disappeared down the street, walking away into her own life with her own lessons learned or unlearned. Inside, Minseo continued her work, teaching students who needed to know that their circumstances didn't define their capabilities. She had started at Riverside High as a girl who felt invisible, unworthy, and out of place. She was ending her time there as someone who had proven her excellence despite all obstacles, won recognition through merit alone, and learned that the opinions of biased teachers mattered far less than the truth of her own abilities. Mrs. Davidson had given her a lesson, though not the one the teacher intended. She had taught Minseo that prejudice exists, that unfairness is real, but that neither one has to be the end of the story. That with hard work, determination, and faith in yourself, you can overcome even those who hold power over you and don't want you to succeed. It wasn't a comfortable lesson. It wasn't an easy one, but it was real and valuable and true, and in the end, that made all the difference years later. When Minseo was in college and then graduate school and eventually became a teacher herself, she would think back on Mrs. Davidson sometimes, not with anger but with a kind of sad understanding. Mrs. Davidson represented something larger than just one biased teacher. She represented all the people who make assumptions based on appearance, who judge before knowing, who let prejudice cloud their perception of potential. But Minseo also represented something. She represented every student who refuses to be diminished, who works harder when told they can't succeed, who proves their worth not through words, but through undeniable achievement. Both lessons continue to matter. Mrs. Davidson's lesson about the persistence of prejudice, and Minseo's lesson about the persistence of human dignity and determination in the face of it. Behind every racist teacher lies a lesson they never expected. Sometimes the greatest teachers are the students who refuse to accept unfair limitations, and sometimes the most important lessons are taught not through words but through the quiet, powerful act of excellence that cannot be ignored or denied.